Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and welcome to this episode of Cracking Addiction. And once again, we have with us the good Dr. Laura Petracek. Hello, Laura. How are you?
Good, Ferghal. How about yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. So the last time we spoke, we discussed Dear Woman, which was your take on the Dear Man mnemonic that allows us to conceptualize a framework by which we can negotiate with friends, partners, colleagues, etc., or anyone really. Now, we'd got through dear and we got through the W of Dear Woman. So we've got to now discuss the O-M-A-N. So we're going to do O-Man today.
Okay.
What does the O stand for?
It stands for observing or observation. So that means you're in the middle of this negotiating. You've done describe, express, assert, remind, and then you're in the observing is kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, where are things now? Because usually once we start this negotiation or start this discussion using Dear Woman, by the time we're through it, most people are calmed down or emotions aren't running as high. And so it's kind of like doing a temperature, taking the temperature. Where are things now?
So there's a number of things there's a number of things that I would like to talk about, when we're thinking about observing. Firstly, you said that, by the time you get to the observing stage, the emotions have calmed down again. And I think there's always a fear, or not always, but there's frequently a fear on the part of people that need the Dear Woman technique, that actually creating boundaries and saying no or asking for appropriate help or assistance is going to in some way threaten the pre-existing relationship. And that's just not true. There's a basic principle that people with good boundaries are well respected and well liked. Good fences make good neighbors. That's the first point I would make. The next point I would make is that, when I think about observing, I also think about being the disinterested observer, almost in the context of acceptance and commitment therapy. What do you think about that?
The disinterested, kind of the neutral observer, you mean?
Yeah.
I think that's an ideal stance. I don't think it's hard to achieve. I think it's easier if you're not emotionally involved. Like, let's say has to do with, talking to your phone company or the gas station or something. But if it's a relationship, I think that would be very hard to be neutral. And, I actually disagree, going back to your previous statement, meaning people aren't threatened by losing the relationship or the person getting upset or leaving, because I do think, clients I work with, and myself included at times, that, if I assert myself like, hey, this isn't okay, the person may get upset or may leave, or, very extreme situation, they may end the friendship or relationship. So that does get in people's way of setting boundaries. And I use the phrase afterburn, meaning I discuss with the client, okay, you're going to make this statement next time you see your husband, wife. I don't like it when you're late. And you're probably going to have guilt feelings come up, or worry or fear. And those I call the afterburn. Those feelings will burn off just like the fog does. So when we try a new behavior or assert ourselves or say no, there's a lot of jitteriness inside. Like, how is this going to go over? And so to remind clients that, yeah.
So how does observing help us deal with the afterburn?
Well, observing, like, how am I feeling now? Okay, I feel a little scared. I just told this person, I didn't want to go to X restaurant. I wanted to go to Y because of food allergies or whatever. And they weren't happy about it, but I kind of held my ground. Now, how am I feeling and how are they feeling? Do they seem to be more entrenched in their position, or are they backing off a little bit? And where am I? Am I feeling afraid after asserting myself, or am I feeling confident? Or are we at more of a standoff? So kind of reassessing the situation after setting a boundary, after asserting and stating how you feel. And it could go both ways.
Yeah. And I suppose thinking about what you've just said, this acknowledgement of the potential for, the fog and the negative feelings and the self-doubt, that's when the mindfulness, the M of man, the mindfulness really does come into its own, isn't it? And now's the time, if ever before, you really do need to start practicing some mindfulness to kind of get yourself centered and grounded and be in the present. What do you think of that?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. I would just say the M in woman, but
forgive me. I'm trying to change my mnemonic from dear man to dear woman. I think it's great that you've got this whole picture approach and then being observant. I think it's really great.
But yes, being mindful is key, being in the present moment. Because a lot of times as our negotiating or discussions are going on, we're still stuck at the beginning. Instead of, oh, wait, they've kind of softened a little bit, or maybe they've actually redoubled down. So that's also challenging, I think, for people to be in the moment of discussions instead of, well, last week you said this. Well, that's not right now. Let's try to deal with the issue at hand.
What advice would you give to someone who's trying to be mindful in the moment in that situation? I mean, what does it mean to be mindful? What techniques can you offer?
To be aware, like do a quick body scan. What am I feeling right now? Okay.
Yeah.
What's my take on what's going on with this other person? Are they, are they getting escalated? Because sometimes with this skill, especially if a client asserts themselves and the other person isn't really used to them doing that, they could get escalated. Like, what do you mean? How dare you say XYZ? So to be aware of that, and maybe this is a good place for a timeout, meaning let's agree to disagree and we'll come back later for this discussion. But sometimes, unfortunately, the person who we're also having this discussion with the things could go the other way. They could get more upset if they feel they're, quote, being challenged or you're asserting a boundary. Instead of if you do your usual MO of just capitulating, not setting a boundary because you want to people please or not have conflict or conflict avoidant.
Which then brings us on, I mean, this idea of people pleasing and capitulating, which then brings us on to the A in Dear Woman, which for me means don't apologize, don't capitulate.
Yeah. So I love this skill that Dr. Linehan talks about. No apologies. And sometimes people go, what do you mean? We should apologize if we're wrong, right? But a lot of times clients, and myself included, like if you stub my toe, I used to say, I'm sorry. I mean, I would apologize for everything. And that's not good for someone's self-esteem, for someone's mental health. When I was starting my internship for being a psychologist, a psychologist who was already working there was saying, okay, and this is where the paperwork is, and this is where that is. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. Can you tell me where this is? Oh, I'm sorry. I would start every sentence. He goes, why are you apologizing? This is your first day. How would you possibly know this? And I was like, wow, he's right. And I wasn't aware of then how much I do that. And a lot of clients do too. I'm sorry, could you say that again? I said, well, I want you to try, if you can't quite hear someone, forget the I'm sorry, just say, can you say that again? And it's really something, being mindful is also gaining awareness of how often we apologize when there's no apology necessary. And I think especially for women, apologizing is our middle name. And so it's even more so to teach women that you don't need to apologize. Basically, you end up apologizing for who you are, and that's not healthy. That's not
good.
It's not good for
Yeah.
anyone. Yeah.
Because it's you've alluded to, a kind of a linguistic tool that people do use. I'm sorry when they don't mean I'm sorry. They mean things like excuse me, or I want attention, or I'm going to interrupt something, and reflecting on myself, when I disagree with people and I'm about to say something that is disagreeable, I
Right.
will preface it by saying, or I used to preface it with, "I'm sorry, but,"
Right.
and really, for me, part of
So
the
now I'm
BA.
curious, what do you say instead?
So what I say, excuse me,
Good. That's
however.
a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Excuse
So
me.
for me, it's not just, it's not just enough to say to someone, don't apologize, but you've actually, I try and teach people the phraseology to use instead. And I
Yes.
think excuse me is it the same as I'm sorry? Because it is
No.
socially acceptable. It's linguistically acceptable to say excuse me when you're about to interrupt someone or when you're about to disagree.
Right. It is acceptable, and it's less
Yeah.
damaging to one's, or not damaging, that's kind of a strong word, but less
Detrimental,
detrimental to
pejorative.
one's self-esteem. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, I had this issue yesterday morning, right? In my place of work, we have a young lady who works as a cleaner, and she's from a foreign country, and her English is very minimal. And I chat to her in the morning because I'm there early as well. We say hello, how was your day, et cetera, et cetera. I'm teaching her, this is a tie, this is a shirt, stuff like that. And so we've got this kind of superficial friendship relationship. And I was in the office, and she knocked the door and walked in with her mop and bucket and said, "I'm sorry." And I looked at her and I said, "I don't want you to say I'm sorry again, because you're doing your job and I'm the one that has to get out of your way, because unless I get out of your way, you can't mop the floor. And from now on, I want you to say, excuse me."
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So, but she didn't
Definitely a
even know that phrase. And that really brought it to the fore that a lot of people don't actually know how to speak in these situations where they would previously revert to the good old tried and tested, "I'm sorry, it's all me, it's not you."
Well, and also, I'm sorry, it comes from a one down position. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, please don't be mad at me. I'm the
yeah,
one who's at fault.
yeah,
And then that's
yeah,
usually has to do with
yeah,
culture or cultural, or where they see themselves in the scheme of things and the rating
yeah,
of who's more valuable or important than others. So it has to do with, oh, I'm just a lowly, I mean, in her mind, I'm just guessing, oh, I'm only a cleaner and you're a doctor. So I'm going to say I'm sorry because I'm not
yeah,
in a higher position, so that's
yeah.
part of it, I think, too.
Another phrase that I hear a lot is, sorry, I didn't hear you.
I think it's great you taught her the difference, or
Mm.
that you told her, don't ever say that again.
Yeah, I don't want to hear "I'm sorry." You're doing your job.
That's
This
right.
is what you have to do,
That's
and we have
awesome
to
that you taught her
facilitate your
that.
doing your job. Yeah.
Hmm.
Another phrase that I hear a lot is "I'm afraid not," or "I'm afraid that."
I'm
Can
afraid
you do
that,
this?
can
I'm
you?
afraid not. Yeah. Can you do this for me? I'm afraid not. I'm not afraid that I can't do it. I'm just,
Ah,
it's just another way of saying I'm sorry. And I tell
say
people,
another way of saying no.
Yeah, I'm afraid
Yeah.
not. If it's another way of saying no, I actually prefer the phrase, it appears that that is not possible, or it appears not.
And why do you
Because
like
I'm
that
not
one?
afraid. I'm not actually afraid. I'm almost apologizing for disagreeing with you.
Yes. Yes.
So it's almost an apology. Well, actually, it's not. I'm not apologizing. So
Mm-hmm.
I prefer the phrase "it appears not" or "it appears no," because it's taking that agency away from me to over there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that. And also there's
What?
another one, I need
Go on.
time to think about it. So we don't have to
Yeah,
answer right away because a lot of times there's always this pull to get an answer right now. And
yeah,
instead saying, I need time to think about it. And then usually the person doesn't even come back around. Or if they do, they're not really expecting it to be a yes. So you're kind of like
yeah,
giving them a soft landing.
yeah. That's yet again a very useful segue to the end, isn't it? I need time to think about it so that we can negotiate.
Yes.
Talk to us about negotiation in Dear Woman.
So negotiation has to do with, well, it depends on, there's some other factors that come involved or are involved in negotiation. Like, how important is this relationship to you? If it's of high importance, then you're going to maybe be more flexible in negotiation or more giving in your stance. Whereas if it's not important, you may stand your ground a little bit more or not have as much emotional investment. And then, so depending on how much you value the relationship, you decide with yourself, how important is it? How important is this that where you want to go to dinner is not where I want to go? Well, in the scheme of things,
Mm,
Laura, it's not that important. So, but if the question was, uh, I think we should buy a house in Paris, what do you think? Well, that's a very different question. That one I would definitely want to negotiate on a more deeper level. Um, so, yeah, how important is it really? Well, yeah, where we go to eat, okay, let's go where you want to go. I don't want, it's not worth getting into, but where we're going to spend $500,000. Now that I want to talk more about.
is that just a way of capitulating?
I don't see it as a way of capitulating. I see it as a way of kind of ordering the importance of what you're
Mm,
discussing. So,
mm,
how important is it? Is it really that important to get into a huge discussion where we eat? Unless it's like a Christmas or birthday dinner, then, that's a little bit more important. But I think for an everyday meal, it's not that important. Or I want to go here grocery shopping. You want to go there. How important is that? Well, they have X, Y, and Z here. Oh, okay. Well, they don't have it over here. So I think it also depends on the importance of what's being asked or negotiated. How important is it to you? And a lot of times we think everything is of utmost importance. And the thing is, a lot of it, our day to day negotiating is not like a life or death decision, but we
yeah,
take it that way when a lot of times it's our ego that's involved and has nothing to do with what's being negotiated. So you take your ego off the
absolutely.
table and you're like,
Yeah,
well, it's not so, let's go over here for dinner.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's all about ego. Right. Now,
Hmm.
let me tell you a story. A friend of mine was going on holiday with his brother and his sister-in-law, and his wife, and his brother and his brother's wife. And they did this every year, and they always went somewhere. And there was the same place, and there was always a competition about who got the best bedroom. And officially, there was supposed to be an alternative arrangement, but it never worked because this friend's brother always got there first and commandeered the best bedroom. And This friend of mine, he and his wife, of course, had the huge argument because the wife wanted the better bedroom, and the wife then said, well, you never negotiate, you never assert, you never meet my needs, you never, it became a very black and white argument about people use the word like never. When I hear the word never, it was not never true. You can't ever say never. But that's just a function of the heightened arousal and the emotions. And he came to me and he said, how do I deal with this? This is, I would, it's becoming really an issue that I get a bedroom that's got an ensuite bathroom rather than having to walk down the hall and use the main bathroom. And he was so wrapped up in the value system of this process and how it reflected the power dynamics between him and his brother. He couldn't take the ego out of it, and nor could his wife.
Yeah, I definitely hear
that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one example of many examples that I can think of in terms of how, if we can take the ego out of this, you don't need to, you can negotiate, which then brings me to the other point about if you take the ego out of something, are you actually freeing yourself from want, which is, I'm led to believe, one of the paths to true happiness in the Buddhist philosophy. So if you don't really care what the outcome is, and you can be that objective, disinterested observer.
I think if you take the ego out of it, I think there would be a lot less arguing and discussion, because like what the example you just gave, I hear the wife even having more of her ego involved than him.
Yeah.
And not just ego, but she interpreted him not standing up as somehow feeling like her needs aren't important. She's filling in the gaps in a negative way. Whereas I don't think that's where he was coming from at all, but that's how she interpreted it in a negative way.
Yeah.
And
So there's a lot of projection there.
Yes. Yeah. I'm curious, how did you resolve it with this couple or this client?
Oh, it's not my job to resolve that, thankfully. It was just my job to support him and be supported. I resolved the situation by providing him with emotional support and said, no, there, you poor thing. Well, what do you think? How does a psychologist resolve any problem? What do you think? How do you feel about that?
But, it is interesting when
how does a psychologist change a light bulb?
The light bulb has to want to change, Ferghal.
Has to want to change itself.
Going back to the, having your ego involved, there is something very freeing about like not having your ego involved. They have in the 12-step program, they're saying you could either be right or you could live. And I thought, I like the idea of living better than having to be right. Because being right is having our ego involved. The situation where this client was correcting this person they were dating, they're from another country, they wouldn't necessarily say the words correctly. And I said, what if you just let her say however she could best say it without getting your ego involved or having, saying, I know the right way. And, she said it was very freeing, like not having to correct someone all the time or,
Takes a lot of energy to be sarcastic, doesn't it?
Yeah. It most certainly does.
On that sweet note, we're going to have to wrap it up because once again we've run out of time. But I really want to thank you for your pearls of wisdom and for showing us the dear woman technique for negotiating with friends, colleagues, partners. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Ferghal, and thank you for having me.
That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.